Spratling, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Community Tampa Bay. The Pathways to Understanding Learning series is a partnership between the Tampa Bay Times Newspaper and Education Program and Community Tampa Bay. We want to thank Sue Bedry from the Tampa Bay Times for her partnership on this most meaningful collaboration. Through the generous support of the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation and the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Arts Building Bridges program, we offer this learning series to disassemble prejudices, stereotypes, and biases that exist about Muslims and the Islamic faith. In this time of deep division, we hope to generate cross-cultural conversations that explore our own identities, values, and biases, foster greater understanding and respect of persons of different cultural backgrounds, and help to create a more inclusive community for all. Tonight, we are hosting a panel discussion to foundationally develop mutual understandings. In the future, this series will be an interactive space where we will have small group discussions for connection, learning, and understanding. For those attending their first Community Tampa Bay event, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about who we are. We are a small but mighty team of 4 humans committed to the vision of creating a community free from all forms of discrimination. Our mission is to cultivate inclusive leaders to change communities through dialogue and cross-cultural interaction. In other words, we empower people with the tools to have hard conversations with others who don't look like them, live like them, or love like them, to create a community free from all forms of discrimination. We believe we can affect positive change when we have leaders across identities who influence culture and interrupt systemic institutional discrimination through personal relationships, advocacy, and representation. So tonight's program is to raise awareness and to recognize the myths, prejudices, and stereotypes and discrimination that occurs against Muslim community members. We are pleased to begin this learning series with tonight's panel discussion, and we hope that you'll join us in future sessions where we will have collaborative dialogue and solution building. It is now my honor to turn tonight's program over to my colleague, Masa Mochizuki. Masa?
Hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Masatoshi Charles Mochizuki. I just go by Masa, he, him pronouns, and I am Program and Development Coordinator here at Community Tampa Bay. And I have the distinct pleasure of doing a brief introduction of our panelists for tonight's discussion. And I'm also then going to pass it over to our panelists to actually give a little bit more of an introduction for themselves, because that way there is no way that I can, there's absolutely no way I can do them justice. So that's the reason why I'm going to do it, just a brief one-liner for each of them, but then throw it over to them. So first on our panel is Miriam Rana. And all of these folks are connected with us in some way, shape, or form. And Miriam is a visual artist, has been in the Tampa Bay area, now is living near Tulsa, Oklahoma, but has been an integral part of the Community Tampa Bay family, and is absolutely somebody who has demonstrated a commitment to developing and connecting with everyone in our community. Next on our panel is Lena De Asti, who I have actually had the honor of knowing for a number of years. She is an incredible boss human being who is currently studying at University of Chicago and is doing so many things, and I can't wait for her to tell you all about all the things that she's doing and all the leadership roles that she has. And finally on our panel is Shakira Parker. Sister Shakira is a longtime community organizer and has been super, super active, and also has some connections through Anytown and Community Tampa Bay via some family members. And so I cannot wait for her to also share a little bit more about all the things that she is doing in the community as well. So with that, I want to pass it over first to Miriam to introduce a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Masa. You did a fantastic job. My connection with Community Tampa Bay is that I started off as a Anytown volunteer, and then I just was eager to learn more about Community Tampa Bay. And I was a board member for, I believe it was 3 years, and I just termed off, and I've been attending Anytown whenever I could. I recently relocated from Tampa to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I recently became a mom. So that's a little bit about me. My day-to-day is that I am a traveling exhibiting artist. This is one of my paintings behind me, and I'm Muslim. And that's
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you so much. I feel like this is tradition to just give snaps, so I'm going to give snaps to Miriam. Thank you so much. And now I want to pass it over to Lena. Lena, go ahead.
Thanks, Masa. Hi, everyone. My name is Lena De Asti. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I had the pleasure of getting involved with Community Tampa Bay when I was going into high school. So 2015, I was involved in Anytown, which is a 5-day, 4-night program for everyone who are students in the Hillsborough, Pinellas County area. It's a free program that our amazing sponsors pay for. So I got to go with my sister. I got to meet the CTB family, and I really just fell in love. It was a lot of energy that I wanted to be around, and they were a huge part of my community in high school. I ended up interning with them later. I volunteered throughout high school, served as a co-director with Montelio and Sam the year before I went to college. And then I went to the University of Chicago, where I'm currently studying. I'm a second year in the college. I'm studying the intersections between economics, human rights, and data science. So essentially, I'm seeing how tech and social identity kind of fit into that. And then I also started a podcast and produced that now called Kinda Sorta Brown. And that has conversations centered around identity, policy, and advocacy. And I think that it's a great way of keeping Anytown spirit with me. So I absolutely love Community Tampa Bay, and I'm excited to have these conversations today on Islam.
Boss, thank you, Lena. This is amazing. As always, snaps for our panelists. And finally, I would love to introduce or have Sister Shakira introduce yourself a little bit more.
Hello, and thank you for having me. So my relationship with Anytown, it goes back. Obviously, we appreciate Community Tampa Bay for all the work they've done within Tampa, so many different programs and so many people that you've reached. I also, I'm a mom, and so our relationship goes back with one of my children actually attending Anytown, maybe over probably about 7-8 years ago. And so that relationship was formed, and being able to see the type of work that Anytown does. So for myself, I'm a community advocate, working across the spectrums with many different nationalities, many different faiths, really trying to make sure that we can bridge the community and then introduce Islam into the mainstream and vice versa as well. So I also represent a policy institute called Shadra Consulting. And one of the things that we do is that we work on human security problems and where they intersect. So finding those different solutions and a triangular relationship between academia, grassroots movements, and then artistic advocacy. Some of the diversity or things that we focus on are equity, inclusion, race and ethnic and gender relations, also Black, Indigenous, and biopic communities, criminalization. So we come about it from an academic, research-driven and action-oriented methods.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sister Shakira. And again, snaps for our panelists, all of our panelists. And for those who don't know, Lena mentioned a little bit more about Anytown. So just to kind of add on a little bit more, as she said, it's a 5-day, 4-night program for young people, and it fits in with our larger Community Tampa Bay vision of ending all forms of discrimination. And our work involves creating spaces where we can cultivate and support leaders who are doing the actual work of leading cross-cultural dialogue and cross-cultural interaction in our communities. And by doing that, we believe that we can actually have agents who are actually creating systemic change at all levels of society if we are cultivating and supporting the folks who are actually on the front lines doing the work in our community. And so our three panelists tonight are three such people who are doing incredible work in our communities, and we are honored to have them here so that we can learn and listen and have some conversation together. So with that, I would love to start off our conversation because our theme this evening is getting into the assumptions, the stereotypes, and the myths around Islam. What we want to do is just go ahead and get started with this first question of what are some of the assumptions that people commonly make about you as an individual based on your faith? Miriam, would you feel comfortable starting us off?
Sure. So some of the assumptions that I have faced, I started wearing hijab at the age of 12. And so I remember life before wearing hijab as well. And I remember because I was a brown person of color, and I had traveled to Pakistan that year. I was in 4th grade at that time. There was a boy in my class who said that I was off worshiping monkeys. And this is like a pre 9/11 world. So I remember anytime I mentioned Pakistan, it was like a foreign word. It's like, I don't even know how to like re-say what you just said. So there wasn't a lot of knowledge and education on what that was. And then after 9/11, after seeing Muslim hijabi women on TV doing everyday things that Muslims might do, like praying or walking around in their home countries in hijab or other clothing, I realized that I was being associated with that. And so when I moved to Florida, so I lived in New York during 9/11, and I remember the smoke being, and I will definitely get back to the question, but I remember the smoke being in the sky for a whole week. And I was 1 hour away from the trade centers. And so a lot of my classmates had been affected, a lot of people that I knew. My own father was supposed to work that day near that site. And so the world was very different after 9/11. Now, as someone who's Pakistani, I realize that I will always seem different, whether I was wearing a hijab or not wearing a hijab. I will always be from somewhere else in the mind of some people. So I was born and raised in New York and then moved to Florida, now in Oklahoma. So geographically, I think like there's just a lot of different a lot of different viewpoints. One of the things that I have heard a couple of times is that and it is asked very earnestly, is anyone making you wear that? Or who is making you cover your hair? But I think that a better approach is, so tell me why you might cover your hair. So that takes away the assumption that it is something that is forced upon me. So I think that is something that is really different, because I feel like my soul, like the person that I am, is a very free person. It's like how I don't view myself as someone who is caged. So it's very hard to start a dialogue and discussion with someone who might feel that way towards me.
Thank you, Miriam. I really love that point of like, what are the assumptions that are embedded within the questions that we ask each other, and sort of how do we start to check that in ourselves. I would love to have some of our other panelists respond to that as well. What are some of the assumptions that people commonly make about you? Lena, would you share as well?
Yeah, I see, Shakira, if you want to go first, I see you're unmuted.
Oh, okay, sure. I would say that I'm from someplace else, and I'm an LA girl. I mean, so I think that people oftentimes, they'll think that I'm from someplace else, just on site, just because of the hijab, not even understanding that when I am American, and not really even understanding that we also have third and fourth generation, Muslims that have come here that are also American and share that same American experience. But for myself, um, being from Los Angeles, being from the States, and then reverting to Islam at a young age, I don't think people really understand, that when they see me. I would say that I work in corporate America. I'm in finance. One, I guess, even working, managing other employees. That would be another stereotype. I was told one time, there was a board meeting. It's a closed door board meeting, and it was brought up that, well, aren't they supposed to be submissive, because I was vocal in the meeting. And so, that was surprising. And then I think, just in general, not understanding what we believe, like, are they a part of a cult? Are they, not worshiping the same, God and the deity, but that there's something weird or strange, and, not understanding the faith and spirituality that I have as a person.
Thank you, Sister Shakira. And Lena, would you mind sharing as well?
Yeah, of course. As you all can clearly see, like, I don't wear the hijab, but I still am a Muslim woman and I still practice my faith. And I think something that always comes up both in the community and outside of it is I always have to defend my faith and defend being Muslim to the entire world. And this kind of goes on the opposite end, right? Of, seeing someone with hijab and saying, oh, you're oppressed, right? And seeing someone who's not wearing hijab and like, okay, there's no way that they could be, Muslim person. So I think something that's an assumption that people have is that, you don't expect someone who is a college student to be the same exact type of college student, right? So why would you expect a Muslim person to be the exact same type of Muslim person as the next? Everyone has this identity, but how they practice it and how they live that out, it can be completely different. The tenets are still the same, you still are a good person, peace be upon the world. Like, these are, fundamental core factors of Islam. And me not wearing the hijab doesn't take that away. And I think that's a huge assumption that I'm constantly trying to navigate. And, even when I go back to Egypt, like, there's, you have to sometimes like defend that. But I think for me, it's being really strong in that. And just like a quick story, I think also, like, being a brown person growing up in my middle school, predominantly white, I was the only other Muslim person outside of like my siblings who are blood related to me. And I mean, it's nice to have like my sibling there, but I think the assumption was I've only grown up post 9/11. I was 1 when it happened. So my whole life has been that. And it's, again, I'm not going to take it as like my whole life has been oppression, but that has been my life and the experience and that specific identity. And I think that middle school was just a time where people would say, I can't believe that, the US government didn't put you all in camps or do something about you when you all were there. And I think that assumption that we were dangerous and violent is something that I really want to bring up outside of just being like a Muslim woman and not wearing hijab, because that also comes with that I'm not visibly Muslim to people. So I think that that's also something that needs to be addressed, of how we other, like Shakira was saying, our, the God, how we other, how we pray. These are all things, I think, assumptions that, I navigate being a college student, I navigate being first gen. But again, I think the community and our allies are, really strong. So I wouldn't say it's, all bad. I would say that the community's incredible, and the allies are too.
Thank you, Lena. I think everything that you said, Sister Shakira was mentioning this people just not understanding, the lack of understanding being such a key pivotal piece, and the lack of knowledge. And then Lena talking about some of these expectations and sort of the pernicious aspects of these assumptions that, or not aspects, but how pernicious these assumptions are and the impacts of these. So we want to get into this a little bit more. I actually, speaking of Lena, what you shared about the assumption of dangerousness or violence, kind of bridges into this next question, which is when it comes to stereotypes that, as it specifically applies to the community at large, of all the stereotypes, and there's so many, and there's so much misinformation or lack of knowledge and ignorance, which do you think are the most harmful that we need to start deconstructing now? Like, what are the things that are in your mind or heart at the forefront? I'll kind of go in a different order. Lena, I'll start with you, and then we'll kind of work our way back around in a different way.
Yeah. I think this is a really incredibly tough question, right? Because it's like, what oppressive stereotype is the worst, right? Like, that's, we gotta pick. But I think, I'll bring up the one aspect of just, I think that aspect of component of being seen as dangerous and being seen as a threat and being othered is incredibly debilitating for like the Muslim community, because there's no way to then just integrate, right? Because you can't integrate if you think that this is entirely different, human being, rather than it's just how we live, practice, just like Tammy said, we may look different, we may love different, we may live different, all these things, but at the same time, the principles are the same, being peace be, I always say this to people, I'm like, Salaam alaikum is like peace be upon you, right? So that's the most common greeting that you're going to get from someone who is Muslim. That's in Arabic, right? But like, across the faith. So I just think that that piece of seeing violence and seeing Islam as one, or even, we see this in media and movies, I think that that's something that is incredibly harmful. And regardless of how you practice Islam and how that looks like, this stereotype does follow you throughout.
Thank you, Lena. Can we move over to Sister Shakira? Would you be able to speak a little bit to this, recognizing, as Lena said, that this is a really tough question to whittle down?
Yeah, can you repeat it for me a little bit? You're on mute.
I'm muted again. There we go. When it comes to stereotypes applied to the community at large, of all the stereotypes, again, recognizing the limitations of this question, which do you think are the most harmful that we really need to start deconstructing now? What's sort of most immediate for you?
I always talk about, and part of Shadra Consulting is talking about human security, problems and where they intersect. And so taking out the humanness of when you see a Muslim, when you see a Muslim woman, or when you see a man, or when you see the children, or when you see them praying, I think the most harmful thing is taking out the human element. We all have the same concerns when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education, when it comes to wanting to be able to put a roof over our head. And so what happens, and just like Lena was saying, if you are putting in this violence tendency and not seeing that next person is human, right? You have the media that has, put these different stereotypes and biases, on Muslims or on Arabs as well, so that even, Indian people, when they're dressed a certain way, then they're attacked. The other element is so detrimental to our community, because then you're attacking this unknown from the things that you're seeing, instead of realizing that these are my neighbors, these are my communities, these are my doctors, these are my teachers, these are my friends, these are my college buddies, these are the people that I work with. And keeping that centered, so that you realize that it's just like in our family, we have people we have different characters in our family, and we have different characters within faith as well. And so I think really stopping seeing us as human is a huge problem, where it is so much disconnected from who we are as a people.
Thank you, Sister Shakira. And I think what you said about the othering and the separation, it kind of fits in with that theme again of like the lack of understanding, the lack of really getting to know each other. In the spirit of that, and since we do have this Zoom webinar going, and we're also on Facebook as well, for those who are attending, we encourage you, there's actually on the Zoom, there is a question Q&A feature at the bottom. So as we're going through this, we have obviously some prepared questions, and we're going to continue this conversation, this panel discussion. And at the same time, we would love for y'all to submit some questions either via the Zoom link at the bottom with the Q&A, or on Facebook Live. Our colleague is moderating all the tech scene behind the scenes and is making sure that we have all these questions, so that way we can have some time to answer some of those questions to, again, like dispel some misconceptions, but then also like make those connections in terms of understanding a little bit more. And because even, obviously for myself, like there's a lot of things that I don't know, right, as I continue to engage and connect with folks. So with that, I want to pass that same question over to Miriam in terms of the specific stereotypes that you're thinking that we need to address, kind of what's most pressing, what are the ones that are most harmful that we need to start deconstructing?
So I really just love what Lena and Shakira had to say. Lena said a lot of what I was thinking, where being dangerous and harmful and violent is something that is like, to have to break away from that is exhausting and is a hard challenge. And then what Shakira had to say, being seen as human. I'm paraphrasing both of your words, but that is definitely harmful. I'd like to back up what you said, but I'd also like to take it from another angle. And I think the internal struggle of the Muslim person is that these things are being put on them. So I think the confidence of like a Muslim person who grows up in a world that doesn't view them as part of the society. So I think being the other is very scary. And I think that it has a really negative impact on our youth. And I think that I definitely have to acknowledge that I have privilege. My parents came here in the 80s, and I was born here. I don't have an accent. I didn't have to learn English. The minute I opened my mouth, I've actually seen people kind of like ease up, like there's less tension, like, okay, she's kind of like us. And so I think that within the Muslim community, that definitely is something that we have to work on bridging. We have to, we're so diverse. There's so many ethnicities under this umbrella of Sunni Islam, which is mainstream Islam, that I've experienced. So that's my experience. I think that we just have to be able to I guess like address that. And I think that's what the next generation is doing. I was a teacher when I was in Tampa for 5 years, and I taught exclusively at a Muslim school. And I did student teaching in schools that were not Muslim. I went to public school my whole life. And like Lena, I was the only identifiable visually Muslim person that a lot of people knew. And so that was hard. And so I think of like my daughter's generation. She's only 8 months now, but she's going to grow up in a world where people might already have beliefs that are set in stone about being Muslim. And so she's going to have to believe some things strongly about herself in order to counteract that. So I think it's the self-esteem of the Muslim person after long periods of not being understood.
Thanks, Miriam. I think the piece about, I've been getting the theme from what you're saying about there's kind of two elements, the diversity of the community and these expectations, these boxes that folks are placed in. In kind of exploring that a little bit more, from kind of your own personal experiences in your own lives, what are some of the expectations that you experience the most? Because again, those expectations come from all different directions. I think, like you were mentioning, it might be in our place of work, it might be, you know, professional spaces, it could be school spaces. There's a whole lot of code switching that ends up happening. But in navigating all those different expectations, what are the ones that you experience sort of the most pressure around for yourself personally, and how do you navigate those interactions when you have them? Miriam, can I start? You know what, well, let's switch it up a little bit. Sister Shakira, can we start with you this time, and then we'll go in a different order?
Yeah, I would say it's so interesting that at the same time, the hijab or the scarf, it's either intimidating or it's off-putting, right? So either you're seen as this wholesome, you know, nun, right? Or it's the other side, or it's like, oh my God, they're oppressed. You know, it's very interesting, the reactions that people have and feel towards the scarf, you know, the individual choice of the scarf. And so I think one of the things that's interesting in that is then just being able to be yourself and being authentic to whoever that you are. And I think Lena had mentioned, you know, even, you know, people who come in contact with you, they already have these expectations, even if we talked about allyship, even if they're trying to mean well, you know, they might just, oh my God, you know, they're walk and tread very lightly. And, you know, it's surprising to them when you're just you're just real, you know? And, you know, so I'd say navigating being authentic to yourself, whereas on one hand, it's like, oh my God, did they say that? Are they okay to say that? Or can I say that around them? You know, and then just being able to be comfortable, you know, in your skin. And, you know, same what Miriam said is, it is difficult, you know, for our youth as well, you know, who have the stigma of trying to maintain, you know, a wholesome life, right, and be Muslim, because we do know that there are certain limitations, there are things that, or a certain standard of living that we'd like to, you know, abide by. And then also being real to, you know, who they are as a youth, as a young adult, or even as a teen. And so being able to still, even at that level, just be comfortable with being themselves without all of these different pressures.
Thanks, Sister Shakira. Lena, would you mind sharing your thoughts?
Yeah, of course. I appreciate Sister Shakira kind of saying that last point of being a young person, being Muslim, and like growing up in the States, because I think that, you know, that's a testament to how I had to kind of grow up in, you know, the only Muslim person outside of like my sister, who I went to high school with, went to school with. There was always, and I think it's not just being Muslim in this identity, like being the only brown person in the room also had to, you know, use these mechanisms, but it was, how do I make myself palatable? How do I show them I'm funny? How do I show them, even though I'm going to go to a party and I might not be doing everything that they're doing, I'm still going to be having fun. I'm going to make everyone feel really comfortable. You know, my high school events, you know, everyone, like, how do you be that star person, right, for everyone all the time? And I think, you know, I got the experience at like any town where, you know, it's not like you didn't have to be like a star person, but it was that I just got to be, period. And I think that that is in itself is kind of like a radical thing, to be a young Muslim person who can just be. And I think I've really found that in college with people, not because I found a greater, larger Muslim community. There are more Muslim people, but I think that it's because I've found more comfort in just, you know, being okay if the people who I'm with are the people who I'm with, and the people who I'm not are the people who I'm not. And I think that that is like a radical thing for anyone in any identity and like shape to like really claim that. Something that I say with my team often in like our kind of sort of brown meetings is claim it, right? So when I feel that sometimes I'm being overwhelmed by like the expectation of, do I need to be saying this? Is this person comfortable? And I do have that privilege of I'm not wearing the hijab, so like I don't have to worry about the physical thing that I'm wearing. And at the same time, my family members and when I walk into a restaurant, I'm still with my community, with my people, so that that tangible hijab is never lost from me. But I think something that I've really tried to challenge myself to do is, as I acknowledge the times that I have to be palatable, or that I realize I'm working to be palatable, moments that I don't have to be, and people that I don't have to be. And that's a work in progress. We all got things we do, but that I think is something that is really grounding for me. And I really appreciate like Sister Shakira bringing that up. And I know, both Miriam and Sister Shakira are raising children now. So it's even new for them, because I have a younger brother who has a totally different experience than I did. I wouldn't say it's easier, but I think because he's a really confident dude, he is like suave, and he gets kind of a little bit an easier time than I think maybe like I did, but also changing times, right? So it's just interesting to see in like a short period as well.
Thanks, Lena. I just wanted to give snaps to the idea of trying to make ourselves palatable versus just being, and the radicalness of just being. So snaps to that. Miriam, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I think you're on mute, Miriam.
Okay, thanks. So I think that really struck a chord with me to hear the power of just being, just existing, because I feel like as human beings, like being in a capitalist society, everything around us, it is important to be high achieving. And sometimes that high achieving factor is related to like, some people associate it with like you being Muslim or you being from a certain place. And to just be and to just be celebrated for existing is such an important thing. And I want to also say that, like, that is something that I did get to see for a lot of individuals volunteering at Anytown. And so for those that don't know Anytown, like super quick, it's a place where diversity and inclusion are taught during the summer to a group of youth. So or I should say, rather than taught, experienced. So one thing that I read actually this morning, is that Riz Ahmed, who is a Pakistani British actor who just got nominated for an Oscar. He did not win it, but he is getting a lot of attention right now. And one thing is that he was in a Star Wars movie, and he was not able to get to an event because he was stopped at airport security. And he said some of the people that stop him at airport security and pat him down for explosives are also the same people who want a picture with him. So that was something that really just like shook me, because I remember, like, this is a very different way of relating, but I remember in art school, I was sitting at a table with one of my classmates, and I remember him saying that he wishes he was a minority so he would have something to say. And I understand him, but then I also feel like it's really dangerous to put someone on a pedestal. It's really dangerous to erase the hardship of someone because they're succeeding, or just because someone is potentially like a Muslim doctor, business owner, someone that doesn't take away from other aspects of their identity. They will still struggle. And our children who are building their futures are also still struggling. So it's not about what you obtain. It's what I'm realizing in this discussion is who you are already.
Thank you, Miriam. Just want to share that all these responses are absolutely boss, and it's like making me think so much. And have a comment from somebody who resonated with what you just said, Miriam, this concept of fetishizing oppression. And that's something that I think happens a lot, is this idea that, again, this creation of a monolith, creation of reducing everyone to their oppression, as opposed to thinking about what are all the different complex ways that we get to just be and exist in the world, and all the diversity that is there. And so I kind of want to then touch on that a little bit more with, because there is so much diversity in the broader Muslim community, and like literally in a lot, what I think, I don't think I'm overstepping here to say it is the most diverse faith tradition, if you were to globalize it in the world. In thinking about that, there's a lot of popular depictions that erase that diversity and erase that individuality and those distinctions between religion, but then also between religion in culture, right? So what are some of the misconceptions about how you practice Islam and about your cultural background, even if it might be true for some other people? And Lena, could we start with you?
Yeah, I just wanted to hit on that last point that you kind of mentioned, and I want to bridge into this, but something that I talk about frequently with our team on Kind of Sort of Brown is this like oppression Olympics, right? So how everyone seems to be like competing, we're not competing, right? But like the systems that are around us kind of create this environment where we need to compete for airtime on national news. We need to compete for, time on Capitol Hill to who's going to get a bill passed that's going to protect us, right? Like all of this competition, when in reality, we are looking around at each other, and then we just look up, down, to the side, and not just to our next door neighbor, and we see that we're not the ones that are starting this problem. Like it's perpetuated by a larger systemic thing. And I think that's why Anytown's great, right? Because we're developing agents to go back into their communities to dismantle that. But I just kind of wanted to hit on that because I just think that that idea is just really incredible and something that takes a lot of thought. And not saying that I'm fully aware of all these things, but just something that I think about, and I like to bridge all of us to kind of challenge us to think about how we are complicit in this like oppression Olympics in a lot of different ways and spaces. But the one thing and then I will now mention is your question was just about like the misconceptions, right, about Islam and how people practice in the culture background. So like I mentioned, I'm a first gen, I'm Egyptian, Muslim, but I think something that is interesting is that even though some people consider Egypt in the Middle East, other people consider North Africa, it's hard because I think Egyptians feel disassociated from like the standard Middle Eastern person that you saying. And also like the term Middle East is just like bizarre in its creation, right? But I think that it's just funny because like as I think an Egyptian person, how I practice Islam is very tied to like how we are culturally as like Egyptian people. We joke that like we're like the funniest group. We joke that we're really like loud, like these are just like cultural things about being an Egyptian person. But I think when it comes to faith, I think that it obviously has its similarities in terms of, it is predominantly Sunni, sect like Miriam was talking about. But I think when you look at like the global scale, you're seeing, majority of Muslim people living in, the Southeast Asia area. You're seeing the largest population in the US of Muslim people who identify as Black and African American, right? So all of these things that I think just kind of tweak how we see Muslim people at large in terms of race is like a huge thing that I like to point out. And then even in like the Middle East or North African argument, I think that Egyptians sometimes like feel a little bit removed from that as well, just because they're darker skin, they are part of Africa, and people in the Middle East have like their own issues with that. So I think that like all these are like really important conversations when talking about Islam and like geography and race and how we're all set up. But Miriam and Sister Shakira, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Fantastic. Who would like to go? Yes, Sister Shakira.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Just on this call alone, you're Egyptian, I'm Black American, right? Miriam, you represent Pakistan, right? Okay, so listen, you know how like when you're not from someplace else, you can't talk about someplace else, but I am American, so I'm gonna talk about Americans. We don't know geographically where things are anyway. We're very conceited that way. Let's be real. So when we're talking about, we're saying we're so diverse, what does that mean? I became Muslim when I was 16. And before then, like most Americans, I mean, we concentrated with American history, US history, like how many histories can we go that have to do with America? Every place else, we're really not as in tune to, you know? I mean, that's just how we're taught in the school system. We don't really meet a lot of people. Now it's becoming definitely more globalized, but we still, I think, have an outlook that is still internal more than it is external. It wasn't until I became Muslim that I'm meeting people from Somalia, I'm meeting people from India, I'm meeting people, I mean, even the small different communities that are within inside those different continents. It really wasn't, and realizing just like with the US, I mean, if you go to different continents, you're going to have different ethnicities even within those continents. And so like her experience being Egyptian Muslim, her experience being Pakistan Muslim, and my experience being Black American Muslim. When we have Ramadan that's coming up, our dinner tables are going to look different because it's going to represent what we cook. Ramadan is when we fast from sun up to sundown, and we fast not just from food, we fast from things that pull us away from the distractions of praising God, right? Not the moon God, just God. So, my dinner table is going to look different. It's going to have some fried fish. It's going to have some cabbage. It's going to have some greens, some mac and cheese. Like my dinner and my breakfast is going to look different. So when we talk about, just getting into diversity, it also represents, how we even, our practice of Islam sometimes, differentiates on that. So Muslims are not monolithic. We represent many different people, societies, education, and cultures.
Thank you, Sister Shakira. And Miriam?
So one of my experiences with learning about Islam in America was when I went to Michigan, and I saw I got to attend Jummah prayer. So our like service that is for the broader community every week. So I got to attend Jummah prayer at the first mosque that Malcolm X, when he converted to mainstream Sunni Islam, I got to attend, and I'm sorry, my clock goes off, but I got to attend that mosque, and I met people who knew him and his brother and were alive during that time. And I saw so many parallels between being in the mosques that I've grown up in, being in even like the churches that I've like attended, and being in that mosque. Like it was such a beautiful hybrid, because one thing that a lot of people might not know, if you haven't attended a mosque before, is that it's common to be sitting on the floor. And so when I went to that mosque, most of the individuals were sitting in chairs, and the chairs were lined up as well. The style, there was like a call and response style with the sermon, and that isn't something that you always see in a mosque in America. So that was really fascinating for me. So even being Muslim for my whole life, I am learning so much more about Islam for others and their cultural experiences. So for me, that was a warm beautiful experience. And I wish that more people would experience that, because sometimes when people go into the mosque, we're like, why did you bring your shoes in? Why aren't you covering your hair? Why is half of your arm showing? Why are you, wearing nail polish? There's just like, these sounds strange, but if you've been in a mosque before and you've been Muslim for a while, these things are things that you might hear. And it's not really, you shouldn't focus on how someone got to the table. You should probably focus on the table and why they are there and what you can serve when they are there. So I think that my experience as a Pakistani person, sometimes wearing the hijab in certain settings makes me stand out. Sometimes it makes me blend in. Even within that cultural situation, there's a lot of differences. In my family, like my larger extended family, my mom and I are the ones who wear hijab in this way. And so it is also unusual in my family, but it is understood. So one thing that I do want to address is that being from Pakistan, a lot of people ask me about Malala Yousafzai and if women are allowed to be educated in Pakistan. And my response to that often is yes. Like a lot of my cousins who live there are doctors and psychiatrists, and they're my age, and they don't have they don't have the same problems that she had. So it is very dangerous to look at one person as a monolith, or one person as a I guess like model minority, or one person as the saved person in that race, or that group of people. So I think like I would just implore people to think about the diversity of the people around them. I'm not going to have the same story as even my mother. I'm not going to have the same story as my daughter Sophia, and that's a beautiful thing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Miriam. And I am excited because we're going to be having some additional dialogue sessions in the future, and intersectionality and kind of thinking about all the different ways that all of this interconnects in each of our experiences is going to be is going to be something that we're going to talk about a little bit more and have community involvement in. Just in case you noticed, there was a light that got turned off. I'm at the office, and sometimes there are folks who who turn off and on the light. So that's what happened just now. Whoa, there was a thing that happened. We've been talking a little bit about kind of these assumptions, kind of the diversity and the personal experiences. As we scope out a little bit more and think about really the purpose of this series is focused also on, yes, increasing understanding and dialogue, but for the purpose of, at the end of the day, we want to end all forms of discrimination. And particularly the focus of this is ending Islamophobia. And so looked up a definition of Islamophobia, and we all know that dictionary definitions might have their limitations. So Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines it as, quote, irrational fear of, aversion to, or discrimination against Islam or people who practice Islam. I would love to get your thoughts based on your experiences around Islamophobia. What, if anything, would you add to our understanding of this form of discrimination in this system? Let's start with Sister Shakira.
So we're not trying to take over your country, your world. It's not like the aliens are coming and then all of a sudden you have to fear for your wife, grab your babies, grab your children. Oh my God, lock up. No, that's not it. What do they call Sharia laws? Not trying to take over. We're not trying to force hijab on you. None of those things exist, nor are they true. Just like any other faith or our Jewish brethren, our Mormon brethren and sisters, Muslims want to be able to be autonomous in the way that they are individually. whatever I'd like to be able to do. When we talk about freedom to practice our religion, freedom to practice what you want, not imposing on anybody else, that goes the same way. It's reciprocal, not being able to have anything imposed on us, right? If I feel that I am more God conscious with a scarf on my head, cool, so be it. Doesn't affect you, right? If I feel that if I have family law, and when I go to the court, if I would like a divorce or a marriage to be sanctioned, according to my own traditions, then it's okay. It has nothing to do with you, right? It has nothing to do with anybody else. And in other religions, this is something that's acceptable. Obviously, we have the American law. No one's trying to get rid of the justice system. No one's trying to get rid of the Declaration of Independence. A lot of us wouldn't be here without it. So that's not something that Muslims are trying to get rid of. No one's trying to harm you at all. And so it's really has a lot to do with family law and being able, even when you have contracts, Muslims write contracts if you're doing business with somebody, being able to have those be recognized. The Jewish tradition, that is something that they do within the American, within the system. And that's just when that is brought up, it's really a tactic to make you afraid. No one wants to have their way of life threatened, and vice versa. No, we don't want our way of life threatened either. It would be, I would feel like I was if someone snatched my scarf off, if someone harmed me in that way, and that's threatening my lifestyle, that would really make me feel insecure. That would cause me harm, And so respecting people's differences and appreciating those differences and recognizing that there's no harm. No one can ignore any terrorist things that happen. Please, if something happens with somebody that has an Arabic name, that does not mean that the religion is bad, that the people who follow that religion is bad. Similarly, we wouldn't put that cast if someone had an American sounding name if they did something. For some reason, it's really heightened, and it's made to cast a lot of fear amongst people. And really, we have to stop looking and painting everybody with the same brush. There's horrible and evil and crazy people in every faith and every religion in every town and every community. And, so that would be one of the things I would like to caution, about.
Thank you, Sister Shakira. Lena, would you speak to add on?
Yeah, I think in addition to what Sister Shakira was saying about what we are not, I think an important thing to be thinking about is like what we are, kind of like what Sister Shakira was talking about at the end. I find that that's an easier way for me, like, as a college student, to advocate and navigate for myself in this world. The knots will continue, but who I am is will grow, but is also something I can argue for and show. And I think that show piece is also not in a way that I kind of talked about earlier, where I'm, morphing myself into something that's palatable, but just someone who I am and who I am, period. And I think that expanding the narrative of who Muslims are and who's your friend who may be Muslim, who are practicing, I think that's super important. And I think we've talked about it a few times, but, having the experience of knowing a Muslim person is not a trophy, but it is an important, experience to have, to know someone who's fasting during Ramadan, having that kind of subconscious awareness when you're, with them and you talk about your thirst and, all those things. We never want your life to alter because of what we're doing. And I think that to elevate, not just being, someone who isn't Islamophobic, but someone who is conscious and an ally and supportive, that's something that's totally different. So I don't know how I would add to this definition exactly, because I like to figure out a way of how we can just be, the anti of all the things that we're fighting against, which we've talked a lot about when we've seen this summer and like things like that. But I think that really you're like a cohesive addition. You're an ally, you're an accomplice, you're moving that is something that I see as like this anti like Islamophobe, but I don't even want to bring that term in. Like I just want to be like someone who's like that that ally and that accomplice in this work. And a great way to start an advocacy step is like, Ramadan is starting up. When you see, there's gonna, maybe not this, summer, Ramadan, but like most Ramadans, mosques are open for anyone to come in and enjoy a meal for iftar, which is to break fast, and anyone in the community is welcome. You're welcome to bring food, you donate money, whatever you can, and it's just sharing a meal, right? You don't have to be Muslim to attend, but I think that these are ways that we can really be thinking about, to break down the irrational fear, is to like have a meal, is to really be conscious, is to really be thinking critically about the interactions that you have in a day and how you move through that. And again, I am one Muslim person who is saying this. If you go to another Muslim person, this may not be the experience that they want from you. So that is just my one caveat to my point as well.
I love it. So individualize. And again, I'm hearing, I was snapping on the part that you were saying that it's not just about ending Islamophobia. It's not just the negation of or the absence of discrimination and harm, but it's about proactively and affirming each other in our experiences and in our existences. Thanks so much, Lena. And Miriam, will you close this out with that particular, if you have any additional thoughts on how we can add to this definition of Islamophobia?
Well, I'd like to say that if you feel like you don't know that much about Islam, you are not a bad person, you're not doing anything wrong, you just don't know yet. And I think, like, I've heard this said about homophobia, but it's not that the person is sick, it's just that they just don't know yet. It's not a sickness, you just don't know yet. So I'd like to say that about being Islamophobic also, that maybe you just don't have these intimate conversations, but that's why we're here today. So that you feel like you might know 3 Muslim women a little more than you did before. And so that the fact that you are here, usually often the people that we're talking to are not the people that need to hear it the most, but maybe there's someone in your life who is like staunchly like against Muslim people. And hopefully, like, you could be that ally, you could be that advocate and change how they feel, or you can just encourage them to get to know a Muslim person a little bit more. But it is exhausting for us to be approached. I can say this is my experience as one person at the supermarket or at in line in a restaurant, and just like being bombarded with all of these questions about Islam, especially by a stranger, because sometimes it just feels like defending why you exist, and that's exhausting. And we need to relax also, like just like you're somewhere to like relax and have fun, like let us have that too. So that's what I have to say.
Thanks, Miriam.
If
And
I say something on
yes,
just
absolutely.
I would be remiss as an advocate not to mention this while we're talking about Islamophobia. Is the same thing that makes people have hate or mistrust or fear, the same thing that causes people to have racist antics. It all comes from the same place. And so if you're advocating for one, we're going to have to advocate for other. And we have to realize that this all comes from the same place. And so we have to really be able to address and look at the discrimination. We have to really be able to look at the hatred that exists. And if there's a seed that's in there for one, then it really should be a seed for everything. And if you're advocating for one, you got to advocate for everybody, because we want to be able to live in a world for human security for everybody, not just for some of us. So we can't individually say, I'm experiencing something like this, and be able to recognize that you're receiving it in your own individual, circle, and not realize that somebody else is also experiencing it. So let's make sure that we stand up for each other all together.
Oof, I love that. I cannot wait for this conversation when we engage the large community on conversation of intersectionality and solidarity and community allyship. This is going to be absolutely boss. Thank you all so much for responses around that, because I think that helps us to conceptualize this a little bit more when we think about that term. And I really love, Miriam, what you were saying, because I think it literally, I feel like y'all are setting this up for like the next question. Like y'all are intentionally doing this. I don't know if that is intentional or not. But you were talking about, again, like these conversations and these interactions, right? And again, not having to be in a position of constantly defending, but proactively just building genuine connections with one another. And Lena, I think you mentioned earlier of like, not as a trophy, but actually like, again, as Sister Shakira was saying, was like real genuine solidarity of us standing with each other and growing together. So speaking to that, many of y'all have worked with young humans or have been young humans more recently, or still consider yourself young human adjacent. And young humans tend to be curious, and kind of in thinking about that, what are some of the ways that you've seen young folks bridge conversations around faith and religion? Let's start with Miriam, and then we'll go from there.
Yes, so I haven't seen it, but my husband and I often have conversations about TikTok. So he has TikTok, I don't. So he's telling me like that there are a lot of Muslim TikTokers that, I think that's the word, right? TikTokers that are just very much followed, and people are learning about Islam through TikTok and just through seeing a Muslim person. And that was really interesting to me. So I think that that is a really interesting place to get some of your information. And just seeing people live their lives. Like I've been seeing more ads with people in hijab, and sometimes it really is just a piece of fabric that someone is wearing. You really just can't see someone's hair in that moment. It's not like Shakira said it earlier, like you're like this nun, you're like this perfect person. Some people apologize when they curse in front of me, and I'm like, sometimes I curse too, guys. Like I do it too. Like we're not perfect. We're imperfect people that just this appeals to them. So that's what I have to say.
Thanks, Miriam. Let's go to Alina.
I love, Miriam, how you brought up TikTok, because so I'm not on TikTok because it takes up too much time, but I used to be on TikTok. But yeah, no, there's a huge young Muslim community. I think, right, to one point, there is a lot of learning and growth on that front, and not in like this isn't what Islam is, and like it's like a PowerPoint. It's Muslim people being like, we all know when this happens, and it ends up on somebody's reel who's not Muslim, and then they get just to know this like funny joke that when we say inshallah, it means maybe, right? Like that kind of inside joke about being Muslim that people are now being a part of. But it'd be remiss, right, to not acknowledge that like on the other end, if your feed is completely different, the algorithm will give you things that, on the other side of this kind of conversation that we're having. So that's just something that I think is just interesting about like these platforms like TikTok, of how much they can alter based on what you're listening to, or your geographic location, or the most recent video that you've listened to, how the algorithm then gives you something that might be pro-Muslim or being very much anti-Islam, right? So I think that that's really interesting. But, you know, I still consider myself a young person because I'm 20, but, you know, recently 20. But I think that when I think about Islam as like young people, a lot of what I'm seeing, like a lot of the community that I'm growing, especially like with the podcast, is a lot of like people developing our own platforms that we want to use, developing our own kind of antics of how we want to approach that. So like, for example, my podcast, you know, I wanted to create something that didn't exist. That's what I created. There's this one woman, she's like Muslim girl, she has a huge handle. She's awesome. She's someone who just shows like being someone who's like super into fashion and then also wearing the hijab, like someone who, and like there's a lot of these types of like stories, but it's kind of like normalizing it on like the things that we've already been doing as young people, like, right, like it's not by doing that, we, again, I think in that way it's being radical because we're just being, right? Like, so I didn't mention this earlier, but I think one of my favorite drawings is just, I'm literally blanking. I'll bring it up again, but like my favorite drawing is like someone, they're sitting and they're still and they're peaceful. And I think that is why, like, it's my favorite drawing because you normally see like activists in these like really powerful, moving like spaces. So being at rest, I think, is really important, or like showing your fashion is really just fun. So I think that for me, it's just normalizing like the content that I see on my page, like Mariam was saying, or encouraging my friends who aren't Muslim to like hype up this one Muslim creator that I know. Like these are all things that I think for me is like bridging that that gap of religion, and I, in terms of adults, like having that conversation. I think it's also just that what can we build, how can we bridge like these gaps with things and institutions and normalcies that like they already have in their own lives, right? So I'm not building a whole new structure of like, this is a whole new system, this is crazy, and I don't really want to get into it. It's like, no, like you already listened to, you know, this radio station. So if they just pop in something random on like a Wednesday, you're subconsciously going to then have this new awareness, right? Like I'm not asking you to go to any town. I'm not asking you, like we'd love for you to, but I'm not asking you to go to any town. I'm asking you to just, you know, be open and listen and learn like the same waves maybe that you're already doing. So that's kind of how I see it, but there's a lot of different ways. I think there's a lot of different ways to approach that.
I love it. Expand our feeds, expand our own connections. We can choose to consume culture, or engage with culture, rather. Sister Shakira, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, echoing what Miriam and what Lena is saying, is that I've noticed the socialization, you know, of people just being themselves. So you find it in fashion. You see different modest clothing coming out. Even on the New York Fashion Week, you saw some designers come out, you know, with modest wear that are you know, have flavor to it. You've seen hip hop artists, you know, that are going more, you know, that are making up their own Islamic type rap. I mean, you see it in clothing. I know there's a couple clothing lines that are out, the hats. Through poetry, through art, you know, there's a nail polish, you know, that's even more Muslim friendly because, you know, because of the way that Muslims pray and the purity, the sterilization that we go to get ready for prayer. So the regular nail polish, you know, it prevents that. So you see different, you know, companies starting to conform and bring things out. Right now, Party City has Ramadan decorations coming that you can buy. So I think you're starting to see a socialization that's happening, that it's bringing Muslims more into the mainstream, or just making it so it's not just this weird thing anymore. And so certain customs and traditions, because as we know, similar to Black history is American history. Muslim history is American history. Pakistan history, you being here, is American history. You're making America's history. You're making Egyptian lifestyle part of American history. This is us. So that's, I think it's really important. I think it's great that this is happening.
Awesome. Thank you, Sister Shakira. And I think this conversation here of like culture and engaging in all the different ways that our that cultures intersect and interact. I would love to kind of, as we start to wrap up, and we do have some questions that folks have asked as well, as we start to wrap up our conversation, our panel discussion, I would love to hear from y'all. How does Islam in your lives interact with, or inform how you live as an artist, as an activist, as a college student? If you could speak to that, I think that kind of speaks a little bit more to what we were already just talking about, of like the intersection of all of the different ways, all of the different elements in our lives. Miriam, I think I said artist first. I know that you're a visual artist. If you can speak to that, and then we can go from there.
Sure. So I don't do Muslim art. So I think like a lot of people have asked me that in the past, and Masa, you most definitely didn't ask me that right now. But as a Muslim, I think that the history, so culturally, those elements definitely make their way into my art. I think that as a Muslim, like I need to feel like that stillness, that serenity, that focusing, that centering. Like after a day of being super social, I need the next day to be like an introvert and to kind of like recharge myself and get my battery up again. And so as a Muslim person, like I pray 5 times a day, and that's like my specific experience. That helps me have discipline. So that discipline helps me to create my artwork, and it helps me to like have these introspective moments where I can think about myself, my place in the world, and who I am in relation to that. So I think that that's how being Muslim has tied in. Also, I think that a lot of people that are maybe like attracted to my work are identify with being from another place as well, because the theme in the work that I do now is called Place to Call Home. And whether you are an immigrant or you're not, you felt like someplace wasn't home before, or you felt like you're searching for home again. And so those moments make their way into my artwork.
Thank you, Miriam. Going over to Sister Shakira.
I would say, and I became Muslim when I was young. I was a teenager. So I do relate to a lot of the experiences that the youth go to, because while my friends were, partying and drinking and doing other things, I was trying to focus a little bit more and become a little bit more disciplined. But I would say charity is very big in Islam. And so with charity being very big in Islam, it's one of the things that I guess leads me to make sure that I'm volunteering, or that I can help out wherever I can. Islam is a community focused faith. When we pray collectively, that's community focused. When we fast at the same time, the same year, that's community focused. The 5 salats at a specific time. I mean, there's just so many things that we do that are a part of the collective as a community. The prayer that we have on Friday, the Jummah, it's literally a community prayer. And so I find then that it tells me that I'm supposed to be a part of this community, that I'm supposed to be doing something better to help my society and where I live. And so that really is what moves me a lot in how I do either business or how I use my time as well to make sure that I'm benefiting and helping out the community as a whole. Islam also tells me that there is no difference between Arab and non-Arab. Islam also tells me that there shouldn't be difference between the rich and the poor. So that also feeds into the way that I move and the things that I advocate for.
Thank you so much, Sister Shakira. And Lena, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think this question has a lot of different ways to go about it, right? Like intersectionality of faith and life is obviously super widespread. But I think I'll talk about one specific thing. So I know I mentioned earlier, I'm like the only Muslim person I've been to school with and things like that. So I was always trying to figure out what are like these commonalities that I can bridge others and myself so I don't feel as othered, and also like other people understand that like we really are bonded in the same. And something that I think that I've always really been grounded in is the fact that Islam is is an incredibly peaceful religion, as most religions are, but like Islam is like grounded in this like work for others, in this community aspect, and this being there, and regardless of whether or not that other person is Muslim. So I think for me, how I found that is in like creating stories and narratives and being a storyteller with like my podcast as like one thing as like a college student is like being able to share and expand narratives is huge for me, because I never, I didn't get that opportunity unless I was the one actively sharing my own personal story in the high school classroom about something. So being able to like create it on like a larger platform and being able to have, my peers who are different identities come and share their stories, and just being storytellers, I think is incredibly powerful in a world where we really need to be expanding the narratives that we know about people and identities. And I think that that's something that has been really powerful for me, being like a Muslim person and also being the only Muslim person in my podcast group, but still feeling like I have a huge community and storytelling base of people who want to hear it and also, give us space to hear it. And I think that the beauty about, like spaces like that is that the intersectionality of Islam and other parts of my identity is it's like required, right? Like it's required to have us to be like storytellers. We have to be open. We have to be willing. So I think that that's something for me personally has been like a great intersection about like my faith and identity and being like a storyteller.
Thank you, Lena. And that's incredible. I love sort of how y'all touched on sort of different elements in terms of like having calm, that silence, that space, finding community, and then also sharing, advocating, and sharing stories. So there's so many different ways that, as you said, Lena, that this can intersect in so many different ways, right? And so you have to just pick sort of for this answer just one element. But thank you all for sharing that. As we wrap up, I want to get to just a couple of questions that we had folks ask. There's one that's actually kind of fits in exactly with what you said about sort of storytelling and also finding connection with each other and building some of those bridges. Someone had asked or stated that they'd been a nurse for 40 years and had noticed that, when they saw somebody in a wheelchair, initially kind of feeling a little bit ill at ease and just uncertain how to behave. And I think that comes back to sort of like, how do we move? I think Sister Shakira is saying sort of like people kind of being like, all right, how do I act around you and things like that. But that being able to actually speak and connect with each other, then being able to be more comfortable and building those relationships and those connections over time. So there's an affirmation that's been in the chat and in some of the questions in terms of, yes, it's all about us being able to connect with each other to dispel our own, that's the unease that is coming from somebody else, right? That they have to deal with themselves. That is not anybody else's burden, but we need to do that work if we are feeling that unease or that sense of uncertainty in terms of how do we interact and engage with folks. There was another question on here. This is in terms of kind of, I think a couple of you mentioned in terms of different time periods. There's a question regarding Islamophobia. How are things in the US today versus 10 years ago or 15 years ago? Would anyone like to answer or speak to that?
Well, I remember, let's see, so 10, 15 years ago, you would have, after 9/11 and over the last 4 years that we've been through under the administration that just left, I mean, it had increased. I think it had, heightened people's awareness and really capitalized on their insecurities that they were already feeling, unfortunately. And it wasn't just Muslims. And this is the reason why, we all mention that we are a part of one community. So if you're feeling something in your particular segment, then let's make sure that we're looking out for all of us. You have the Muslim ban that came up over this last, 4 years, and like completely isolated and picked out certain countries. And it's that, and then you have with this this past administration, there's so much that can be said, but I would say that it's been a long run of a very bad PR campaign for Muslims. And I think that right now, as a world, and then really as a country, we are becoming more sensitive and to the fact that we have biases and that we have discriminatory practices that we have to alleviate. And I think that the Black Lives Matter movement has benefited Muslims as well, because we're able to bring up all of these culminations that, again, I said, come from the same place. Intolerance, hatred, and fear all comes from the same place. And so I think that I can see, hopefully, that we'll be moving in a bit more positive direction as we start to address some of these things.
Thank you, Sister Shakira. Would either of you like to add on?
Sure. So just 10 years ago, so I'm 30, about 10 years ago when I was in college, things were, there's definitely, like what Shakira said earlier, to answer a question, was the Muslims are coming, they're coming and they're trying to bring in their way of life and threaten ours. That was happening a lot with a certain conversation in Florida legislator. And so that was, I think like that was a little burdensome. So I think like now things are, so to compare it with now, things are a little different. Now it's a little more like, if you have, and this isn't in every place, so it is so hard to generalize, but the mainstream, I think, like, like advertisement and social media, and this might be just my vacuum of people that I know, but if you have a different identity, that's being embraced. And there was a time where being Muslim was like being anti, like if you saw something in Arabic, it was to be like anti-establishment, or it was to really push people, I think, like to see that this isn't the norm. So even now when I see a bumper sticker in Arabic, I'm always like, like I tighten up a little bit. I'm like, is this going to be something that's like anti-Islam, or is it going to be something that just shows someone's identity? And it's polarizing still. So the polarizing aspect is still not gone, but I think that there's a lot of good work that's being done out there to normalize what being Muslim is and the Muslim experience. So I think it just depends on where you live. Like if you're in a small town, sometimes that's a good thing because people don't know that much about Muslims. Like the town I'm in now, people want to know a little bit about what I'm about. But if you're in a big city, sometimes you know a Muslim who you might not like. And that could, I think, like at the end of the day, it is on each individual person to have an educated experience.
Masa, you're muted.
Sorry, this is an invitation, not a call out. So if you would like to add anything.
I think for me, so 10 years ago, I was 10, and back then 15 years ago, I was 5. So I think for me, like in my whole, like, again, like I said, like I grew up in like a post 9/11 world. And it was interesting because I also I grew up in like a predominantly, white area. I went to, again, like I said, my high school was the only Muslim person outside of my sister. So I think for me, it was a lot of, I didn't really know what it was to live in a world where, there wasn't like a heightened sense of fear, I guess, or against Muslim people. And it obviously existed before, but it was just, I think, shifted in America after. So I think like to that, I can't speak to it. But one thing I do like to talk about is like, so for my roommate, both her parents like work in the military. They're like their whole, like they have a long history in it. And, we spent, 9/11 together because we were in our college quarter. And it was just interesting because I think both of our experiences like that day were very different in how we approached it. It was versus a lot of like, I'm American. I feel, pain and sorrow for like what happened. And I feel the solidarity in that. And I also feel the solidarity for my community that had a lot of pain post that event and, retaliation from the government and from the people that the government perpetuated this violence against. So it was something I had to like explain to her of like, this is both painful moment for two different reasons for me. And it was, I think, just something that's interesting that is kind of like a lived experience in a conversation that really has to continue even today. And not just with, I think 9/11 is a huge event. And there are many events since 9/11 that show, hate against Muslim people and violence against, Muslim people in very different degrees. So that's also something I think is something I think about as I'm a person who's only lived in this like post 9/11 world.
I think that speaks a lot to what Miriam was just saying about sort of like this polarization that has been sort of in a sense manufactured, right? Like that's been perpetuated, like you said, Lena, of how we're framing that narrative. This actually kind of connects then with one of the questions from one of our attendees. So I'm just going to read it as it says. As a Christian, I don't think I could answer how the KKK translate the scriptures. So if you can't answer the following question, I certainly understand. So there's understanding there. My question is, how did jihad get hijacked, and how can we, people of all faiths, bring it back to its true meaning? Would anyone like to?
Sure. So I'd like to say, I'd like to answer that in one word: politicians. So I think that in many different places, but what I know most intimately is America. It is a political tactic to make someone else the other. If Muslims are the enemy, then we're not focusing on other problems that we have. And so I think that like that term got used in that way. So it's like manufacturing fear, also like Sharia law. So Sharia law is literally like, I mean, I don't know how to oversimplify it, but it could be like me, like my legal contract, like marriage, or like Sharia law could be like something so simple as like how a person decides to get divorced, or inheritance, or whatever it is, whatever legal matter it is, like, being informed with like Islamic understanding with that tradition. So these terms have basically just been manipulated to create fear. And I think that like I didn't know what a Shia person was, and if I was Shia, until I started seeing it all over Fox News. So I think like that conversation is happening because of misunderstandings of text, misunderstandings of what certain things mean, and then just going with it to benefit you, you as in like the party that is perpetuating this.
Thank you, Miriam. So I hear you said politicians, like just literally the manipulation of these terms for to kind of say like how do we create or negate people based off of saying like this is a word to be afraid of, this is a term to be afraid of. Lena or Sister Shakira, would you like to add anything else? I know Miriam said it really well in terms of the politicians piece.
Yeah, I mean, just like we wouldn't judge the whole Christian faith, based off of a particular group, obviously, and I can't think, I would say, Paul, can you go talk to the KKK for me and let them know, like this is not cool. I mean, we can't put that type of that type of responsibility on Muslim people as a whole. I wouldn't, expect that I would be able.
I think we briefly lost Sister Shakira. Well, we'll wait for Sister Shakira to come back. I think there's a slight connection problem. Lena, do you have any thoughts on this in the meantime?
I think just like going to continue quickly with Sister Shakira's point. I'm not sure exactly where she was going, so I don't want to take the words, but I think when we also talk about when we say trophying, like how we can navigate that is also making sure that we don't have the one person that we require to speak for the entire group. Like just like we're not a monolith, we're not someone, we're not a group who, like I keep using caveats when I say, this isn't what I would like. But again, don't do this for every single Muslim person that you see, because their requirement or their idea of support or allyship or being accomplice is completely different, possibly, than mine. But that doesn't mean that you don't do anything, or that doesn't mean that you don't support. So I think that is just kind of like my take when we think about, these true meanings and like, because what is true meaning, right? Like what is true meaning when it could be different? It is different for me than it is to Mariam or, Sister Shakira. Like it is different for all of us, rooted in similar values, nonetheless, most likely. And, it looks different for all of us. So I think by having those interactions is going to be the thing that really is radically going to change how you're able to support and bring back, right, whatever it is to the true meaning, because you have a real person who you're associating that with. It's not just like this thing that you read or in a book or saw on TikTok, right? Like it's becoming actualized in a human being, which, in a post-COVID world, I think we're all going to really appreciate human interactions. So, I mean, it's a win-win.
Awesome. I really love that point of there is no true meaning, because that, again, gets into that whole thing of creating a monolith and reducing. Thank you for that point, Lena. And Sister Shakira is back. Sorry, I think we're always having connection issues, but would you mind finishing your thoughts?
I think I caught the end of what Lena was saying, so I think she finished it up for me. And so I think, you hit it on the head, which is just make sure that we're not, judging basically a whole faith, religion, or people or culture based off of something bad that we say. And I think the question was, how do we change it? When you know what something is, then you know what it's not. And that's the best way we can change something.
Awesome. Thank you, Sister Shakira. And we have one more final question from our attendees. So recalling incidents like last year's Fenty fashion show, which included a hadith in its music, how do you feel about representations of Muslim women in today's media? In what ways do you think these portrayals could be more accurate and or respectful? would like to take that?
Dang, that's hard too. That's not monolithic either, because people have different levels of modesty. People have different levels of discipline, you know. I mean, that's a tough conversation as well. And so I guess that's really on an individual basis, you know, when you're interacting with somebody about what their comfortability is and who they are as a person. That's kind of a loaded question. But what's safe to say is that if you are seeing somebody who you have different levels of modesty. You might see somebody in a cab, you know, which means that they have their face veiled. You might see someone who maybe has a elongated and a longer scarf. You might, you know, if you see these different styles, you can kind of guess, you know, they may be more, you know, they may be more guarded. They maybe want more security within themselves. They may not, you know, really want to be, you know, approached in that way, or they may not want to be in certain environments. I think it really depends on your individual relationship, in which you'll be able to kind of understand, you know, who a person is. But to your question, as far as fashion and all of that, you know, for me, for myself, I chose to be from one faith to another. So Islam for me is very intimate. My hijab for me is very intimate. The way that I cover is very intimate. That's what brings me closer to and a more God consciousness for myself. So I wouldn't like if people approached me, or guys approach me because they know somebody else who is approachable, you know, if it had to do with, you know, like maybe the opposite sex, or if they're coming in for a handshake or a hug or something like that. While I'm, you know, very friendly and very open, for me, I chose, you know, to have a more visible layer of consciousness. And so I think it just, you have to be aware of who you're dealing with. I think that's with all people.
Thank you, Sister Shakira. And some additional thoughts from Lena or Miriam, if you have any.
Masa, you're on
Oh,
mute.
thank you so much, fam. I'm seeing the thumbs up from Miriam and Lena, and the head nod. So Sister Shakira, thank you so much for, again, like adding this nuance, right? And thinking about, like, at the core, this, you know, let us not reduce and let us not kind of have this one narrative, and that we are having these difficult, you know, conversations and continuing to engage in these conversations, and building sort of this understanding of, okay, again, based off of curiosity and looking into how do I understand your experience, your lived experience, as opposed to here is the experience, the truth, and how do I then continue to then just use a different framework for forcing those expectations on other folks. So I really appreciate that insight. As we wrap, oh, Sister Shakira, go ahead.
I was saying there's Muslim, there's women hip hop artists, you know, there's athletes, there's so much that's out there. So that's, you know, it's not just blanket.
Truth. So as we wrap, we are coming to the end of our time together. I want to do kind of like one final question, but with kind of like a short, like a sentence, like a very, very short response. If you had to sort of like reduce it to a quick sentence answer for this, we are going to have in the rest of the series talking about allyship, and having some additional conversations as we talked about, kind of building on some of the topics that were brought up here. But in thinking about how people can better ally with the Muslim community, with that goal. In those conversations about allyship, in like a sentence or two, what topics would you like to see brought up or raised?
Well, for me, I would say allyship is divesting in your power and resources and giving it to someone systemically who has less. And so making sure that you have those spaces, those understanding to give platform to someone else to be able to make sure that you're lifting up their voice and not overshadowing their voice.
Awesome. Thank you, Sister Shakira.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Lena. I saw that. I'll go last.
You go for it.
Okay, thanks. I think that what Sister Shakira said was so great because I think like we're often seeing just like these, I think like challenging spaces that we're like in right now, where it's like, are we speaking for people who can speak for themselves and like hoping that we're heard? What is your intention? So everything goes back to like the intention behind what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so I think that's a beautiful intention to go and speak for those or amplify the voices that are already there. I should say rather. So like there's plenty of Muslims that want to be heard and like to speak. Let them be heard. And so yeah.
Miriam and Lena.
Thank you. I mean, Sister Shakira said, I think really beautifully, and I think Miriam talked about something which was, I think, really important, which is it might give, I think, the individual who's not Muslim more peace and power to know that we're not asking you to start this whole new narrative, create a whole new story. It's really about amplifying the voices and experiences that are already being had and heard. And the people who are already doing the work, right? Like this event is an example of people who are already doing the work. You know, we're not reinventing the wheel here. The wheel has been created, it has been broken and tried to be broken by like systemic people, but it has been built. And I think that by acknowledging that this is not a sentence, Masa, so I'm really sorry, but by acknowledging that gives us like this, it should give us a little bit of a relief. So I think when I think of topics, I'll get to a sentence. I think it's taking a step back in terms of realizing work and the work that's been done and being done. And then the second part is realizing your power. That's something that Sister Shakira talked about. You have so much power, immense amount of power as an individual in a world where your voice literally, if we're privileged enough as like American citizens to vote, you are privileged enough to go out into the streets in the safest way that we can, in the way that we keep each other safe. And I think that for me, I think that when I think of allyship, I think of this more like we're having someone who's accomplice and with me and who understands my story and individual experience outside of the monolith. And we keep talking about this, and I think that that's incredibly important in these conversations because being a Muslim person, I'm not the same as these two amazing humans on this call, and I'm not the same as another Muslim person that you know and you may not just have that experience with. So I challenge you, as Ramadan comes on, this is a great time to be conscious. When people post on social media, say something nice, like all these things, it's that support, because to post online is a huge thing. So show support in any way you can. And I think that can look different for everybody in the space and reality that it is. But Masa, that was not a sentence at all.
No, it's fantastic. I love every bit of it. Thank you so much, Lena. And thank you. Can we give, I know that we can't hear everybody else on the webinar, but we're going to give everybody on the panel some snaps. Thank you all so much. You are fantastic human beings, and I enjoyed every bit of this. And as we wrap up, please, for folks who are attending, please don't go anywhere just yet. There's a couple of things that we want to do as we thank our panelists and let you know about upcoming events, because again, this is just a start. This is just a foundation for this conversation. And I think our panelists brought up some amazing points, right? That we want to continue engaging with and go a little bit deeper, because there is so much there. There is just so much. So
Masa, you're muted.
I am so sorry. I was muted the entire time. So snaps for all of our folks. I'm so sorry that y'all missed that technical glitch. But thank you so much. Don't leave just yet for our attendees. There is a link in the chat for our Pathways registration for upcoming events, because as our panelists have shared, there is so much. This is just the foundation, the beginning of the conversation, and there is so much more to engage with as we continue to dismantle, right, some of these ideas, some of these systems, as Lena was talking about, and all of our panelists are talking about. So we have some upcoming events. We have Islam and intersectionality. We have Islam and allyship, and Islam and community. And so these topics, we have 3 more coming up throughout in the upcoming months, going throughout the rest of 2021. And so please register for those events so that you can be updated on when those next conversations are. We will be moving from a webinar format because this was just the foundation so that folks can have access to the recording, but we will have much more dialogue and small group breakouts and all the things that we do at Community Tampa Bay to make sure that we're actually engaging in meaningful cross-cultural interaction and dialogue. And I also want to do a quick plug as well for some of the other events that we have, because as we were talking about, there's a lot of intersectionality, there's a lot of different kinds of things that are happening. We do have an event called Huddle for Change in collaboration with the Super Bowl 55 steering committee. And so that is something that we have coming up. We have coming up on April 22nd. So April 22nd, Thursday, from 4 to 6 p.m. There is also going to be a registration link for that as well as our Transformations Community Tampa Bay fundraiser so that we can support the work that we are doing. That is going to be Thursday, May 6th from 4 to 5 p.m. So please go ahead and register for those events. And I also want to say that there are some folks who put in the questions, that there are some additional questions. And so again, I want to encourage you because we don't have enough time for this session, but we will have an additional series, right, of these dialogues, and it will be engaging with the conversations around intersectionality, around allyship, and around community. So please, please, please sign up and get folks that you know to expand this network and expand the folks who are participating in this so that we can build those connections, build that conversation across all of the different faith communities, all the different backgrounds that we have, so that we can do the work that our panelists have been talking about and have been leading on the front lines. So thank you all so much for attending. Anything else that I don't think we got everything covered. We have all the links in the chat. So please feel free to reach out to us, continue to follow up with us, and let's give some more snaps, round of applause virtually to all of our panelists. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Miriam. And thank you, Shakira. Thank you so much, y'all. Have a great evening. Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you, fam. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Shakira.